Hi, folks, and welcome to this week's edition of Voices of Resilience. My name is Eric Mucky, and I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Lost&Found. Lost&Found is a Sioux Falls-based 501c3 nonprofit that facilitates comprehensive suicide prevention programming for young adults ages 15 to 34. And Voices of Resilience is a show we host weekly on Facebook Live to tell the stories and experiences and share the experiences of folks who are helping us build resilience for ourselves, for others, and for our community. So thank you for joining us this week. And we're very excited to dive into a topic that hasn't been talked about as much and might be one of the few things that we take from 2020 and are excited about. And that's a new 3-digit National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. You might have heard of it. The digits are 988. In the late part of 2020, this was signed into law by former President Donald Trump. That would effectively change forever the way that we address suicide crisis by calling into a 3-digit number rather than the current 10-digit version we see out and about. And so we're here today not necessarily to talk about the ways that came into law or the policy that came along with it, although I know as a team anyway, we'd love to dive into that, and we will at some point in time. Today, what we really want to focus on instead is sort of the common acts of resilience that come from this really great technical change that's coming about and how that works here in South Dakota. We're really pleased today to have with us today Jacki Miskimins from Vantage Solutions. They're Director of Marketing based in Mitchell, South Dakota. And what we'll really focus on today is, like I said, not necessarily the policy, not necessarily the way that a 3-digit National Suicide Prevention Lifeline was passed, but the ways in which the technical change, the day-to-day changes that happen in our community and your community, wherever you're watching this from, and how that contributes to a greater effort to prevent suicide in our community. So introducing Jacki. Jacki Miskimins is very passionate about community development, as I can tell as a friend and colleague of hers in South Dakota. And she's really passionate about the role broadband access plays in improving everyday lives. So with a background in economic development, tourism, and higher education, Jacki brings a very broad perspective to the range of benefits and opportunities broadband can provide to communities and regions, and hence why she's with Vantage, a consulting firm, a resource firm for telecom providers, especially in rural areas around the country. She brings additional experience in rural smart city applications, having managed multiple smart city designations, including a really prestigious presentation at the International Intelligent Community Summit. So we got a really great one here with us folks today. And as far as Jacki's background, Jacki has a bachelor's degree from the University of Notre Dame, an executive master's degree in public administration from the University of South Dakota. She lives in Mitchell with a growing family, and we've always appreciated a conversation about her background. So I'm going to bring Jacki onto the screen. Hey, Jacki, welcome to the show.
Eric. Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you. I know I'm thinking to myself, so for those of you watching, Jacki and I are former classmates in Leadership South Dakota. I'm just thinking now how that first conversation we had at our first session translated to now, and I'm still trying to kind of get our head wrapped around that. But let's just dive right in, Jacki. So tell us about what you do.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. So as Eric mentioned, I'm the Director of Marketing at Vantage Solutions. We are headquartered here in Mitchell, South Dakota. And what Vantage does is we work with broadband and telecom providers. And so think of whoever you're writing the check to every month for your internet access or your phone bill. Those are our clients. We work with them to build the physical infrastructure that actually connects what we refer to as the broadband networks or the internet. Now, we do a variety of services, everything from business plans and feasibility studies to regulatory and policy work to engineering and a variety of engineering and then sort of construction oversight, project management, and that type of thing. So we like to call it start to future solutions for those telecom providers, those broadband providers. And as part of that, we needed someone on the team to help get the word out when these changes happen. And that is part of my role, is I help make sure that the word gets out to the folks who need to know it. So we called it the Director of Marketing, and here I am.
I love it. Tell me a little bit, Jacki. So there's a lot going on there. What is What does it all mean to you? Like what drew you to this work, and what gives you meaning in that work?
That's a great question. I am a communicator. I love talking to people. I enjoy writing and having that communion with other folks. And so communion and connection and communication are things that are personally very valuable to me. And so working at a company where that is what we do, we help people connect, is extremely personally meaningful. Now, I am not an engineer. I am not a CPA. You don't want me near your business plans, and you don't want me near your engineering work. But helping get the word out is something I can do. So when I think about the work that Vantage Point does, one of the rallying cries that we have as a company is that better broadband means better lives. And I think we really saw that, especially in the last year, the way that that has come to life. You think of the ability to connect. For as much as we're all tired of Zoom calls, the ability to actually see people's faces when you're talking with them and you can't connect individually. All three of my kids now have had Zoom birthday parties. You think of the ability to continue that education when you are when the schools shut down and folks went home. You think about the economic development impacts of having an adequate broadband connection. Here in South Dakota, we're actually pretty spoiled. South Dakota has a very high degree of connectivity and fiber optic buildup. We have some work to do still. We're not quite all the way there, but we're doing pretty well, especially compared to some areas across the country. So bringing it back to Vantage Point, you think about the impact and the livelihoods and the positive things that come from having these networks. We get to participate in that every single day because we come to work every day connecting people.
I love that sort of the better broadband, better life. I mean, just the sheer concept of being able to say, this is making our day-to-day work. This is making our Zoom birthday parties work. This is making our work come together. It's really cool to hear that perspective, because I don't know, and I know that you and I come from maybe a different breed, but like I don't know that the average person's thinking, oh, broadband, this is super exciting.
But it is. And I think especially in 2020, we all of a sudden saw people get really creative with something that before we might have taken for granted. Telehealth became something that was kind of nice to something that was quite critical. The ability to do online learning became something that a few school districts were being very progressive about. Everyone had to learn it on the fly. And we saw, okay, we've had this great tool. We've had this great essential service. What else can we do with it? I was talking to a colleague earlier this morning, and we just he's in Oregon, and we made the comment that normally that would have been a phone call, but we got to actually see each other's faces, and it helps build that relationship. It helps build that community. So I find it very fulfilling, and we as a company, it drives us every day. It's very rewarding.
I love that. Well, and maybe we can kind of turn into that. Yeah. So I love the idea of like when you're talking about very progressive approaches to education and uses of broadband in the communities you're serving. Sort of the reason we're here today is partially to talk about 988 and kind of the ways in which, obviously we're not going to dive into sort of the policy elements and sort of maybe even like the full set and scope of reasons why we put this into play, but really kind of explain sort of this is a change that's happening in our communities, and broadband's at the front of this, or I should say broadband telecom, whichever term you prefer, I guess. Tell me about that. So from 2020, 988 is going to change things for all of us in the suicide prevention community, but, just broadly speaking. Can you give me kind of a high level sort of explanation of what that looks like?
I will. So I'm actually going to go back a little bit further. It was in 2019 that the FCC adopted 988, and they said that 988 is going to be, or I apologize, it was 2019 that they, and I'm checking my notes to make sure I get this right, they established the 1-800-273 TALK, that suicide prevention hotline. And then in 2020, they took it a step further and said, it is tremendous to have this tool, to have this resource. Now let's make it more accessible. Let's make it easier to remember. let's give it a 3-digit. And so you think about the role that 3-digit dials play in our lives, right? You have to dial 911 in an emergency, 411 for information, call before you dig. You think of some of the role that these 3-digit dials have in our lives. So it's really a place of prominence and a place of importance to give it that 988 3-digit dial. Well, you don't think about phone calls that often and all of the technology and all the engineering and all of the data work and day-to-day work that goes into making a phone call connect. For most of us as consumers, you pick up your phone and you dial the number and the other person shows up on the other end. It's a little bit more complicated than that behind the scenes. And so the FCC, when they adopted the 3-digit dial back in 2020, said, all right, carriers, which is in the industry what we call people who provide voice service, carriers, here's what you have to do now. We understand this is going to take time for you to implement this. Here are some milestones that you need to reach. Here are some things that you need to do. Well, one of the things that needs to be done, and this depends on kind of where you live and who your voice providers are, it mattered whether you had a 7-digit area or you had a 10-digit area. And by that, I mean, when you pick up the phone to dial, do you have to dial an area code or do you not have to? So if I were going to call Vantage Point Solutions in a 10-digit, 605-995-1777. In a 7-digit, it would be 995-1777. So I explain that because the 988 was those middle 3 digits in some parts of the country. And that's part of the technical change that is having to happen over the last several months and going forward here, is making sure that any chance a consumer may have dialed 988 intending to call someone else wouldn't accidentally be routed to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And so what carriers are working on now is doing sort of this end user education where they're trying to get folks to realize, hey, if you didn't dial an area code before, you're going to have to start dialing an area code, no matter who you're calling. In some parts of the country, you didn't have to use that area code. You could just start with, those first 3 digits and go on. So moving everyone to 10-digit dialing is one of the changes that the industry is making. That was a long explanation for where we're going, but that's some of the work that's happening and why.
I appreciate you taking the time for that context. And I know I keep thinking of my friends and family still in course because we can't use the 946 number anymore. Sorry, guys, we have to start calling in full. But as we're kind of thinking of that, I thank you for walking through that because I think it's important for people to know sort of what the technical shift looks like and what that looks like in our day-to-day. There's a bit of a change. There's a bit of a sacrifice. Of course, we're going to have to add 3 digits so that people can dial 3 digits for another purpose. Mm-hmm. In terms of your work and sort of what that looks like day to day for you, sort of what has this change meant for your day to day and how you've had to communicate with folks?
Yeah. For us that are working in the industry, broadband is regulated, telecom is regulated. And so we are constantly in communication with the FCC on a variety of issues. And this is one of them. To be blunt, this was not the biggest issue we handled in 2020. It really sort of just fits into the workflow. You have conversations with the FCC, they go through comment periods, they go through rulemaking and orders, and it's government procedure, it's government process, and then it's government, the regulation that comes through. And so for us, it was kind of just another thing we're doing. It's another memo, getting that out to our clients. It's some explainer videos we've done to help people understand what needs to happen and why. And then it's making sure that the folks we work with are staying in compliance, that they're doing the work that needs to be done. And so on the one hand, it's, I think, incredibly important and extremely meaningful. On the other hand, it's almost this banality of good. That this is, I believe, a tremendously important change. I find it very important that we are doing this. On the other hand, okay, it's a memo. I need to get it into the email template. I need to make sure it gets out to the clients. I need to set the reminder. I need to make sure that that it gets distributed. And so it sort of fit into the workflow. This one just happened to really strike a chord with me as something that is exceptionally important, even above and beyond the normal work we do connecting people and communities.
Fantastic perspective. I mean, just being able to really talk through sort of this is how this works. This is what we're going to have to do. And the fact that, when you think of this on a national scale, to be able to be a participant in this in such a localized way, it's really cool. It's really, I think, something that we may not talk about very often in South Dakota, the kind of influence that a place like Vantage Point has.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We work with providers all across the country. I mean, that includes Alaska and Hawaii and Florida and New England. We have offices coast to coast. Like I mentioned, my colleague earlier in Oregon, we have other offices in Colorado Springs and Texas and Illinois and Charlotte, the Charlotte area there. So it's really neat to be able to have this tremendous company and this tremendous impact right here in South Dakota. So I can enjoy all 4 seasons as it's 1 degree outside. But it's a pretty cool company. It's a cool story. But being able to have this impact is really fantastic. Eric, one thing that I wanted to mention about 988 that I skipped over a little bit, I mentioned that the hotline was established in 2019. In 2020, the order came out that's buying time for these providers to make these changes, do some of that end user education for the 10-digit dialing. There are milestones that those providers are going to have to meet over the next several months, but I think it's really important to note that the 988 itself won't actually go into effect for another year and a half. July 16th, 2022 will be the date that 988 goes into effect everywhere. So I didn't want anyone to get the wrong impression that it was available immediately. We are still working on it. This is a change the industry is still making. We need the time to work through that, to get people educated, to shift everyone's habits and dialing processes. So it's not quite ready. We're getting there. We're working on it. But July 16th, 2022 is when 988 will officially go into effect.
That was a perfect segue, Jackie. I'm glad you brought that up to just speak to the timeline, because we saw a really important comment here show up. Thanks, Wendy from the Helpline Center, one of our recent guests here on Voices of Resilience. Because we know that 988 won't be available until 2022, it's really important for South Dakota residents specifically to know that they can call 211, the statewide helpline, and they can have access to crisis-trained professionals. And if you're wondering too, for somebody who may not be as familiar with sort of the crisis line space in South Dakota and around the country, when the day comes when you can dial 988, it's going to go to the same place. But in the meantime, if you're looking for a 3-digit alternative in South Dakota and for really any sort of support and assistance, you should dial 211. And Wendy, thanks for posting that comment. Wendy is a great partner of ours from the Helpline Center. We really appreciate sort of that added context. And I think, Jackie, the timing of that worked beautifully. So couldn't have scripted that any better in this case. So thank you for that. I want to take just a quick breather for us just to kind of highlight a couple things. And one, each week we come together because of the support and sponsorship of our sponsors from American Bank and Trust and the Astra Family Foundation. We started doing this in the middle of the pandemic. So when we're here talking today about 988 and the changes that are happening, we talk about a few things that have been good that have come out of 2020. The new order for 988 is great. We'd like to say Voices of Resilience is another. And so thanks to support from the Astra Family Foundation and American Bank and Trust, we can always come here each week and share the stories that are really important to helping us build resilience in our community. If you'd like to learn more about our sponsors, you can go to the links that are shown here. So the Astra Family Foundation, they're based in Rochester, Minnesota. Their focus is faith, family, community, and healthcare. Their website is astripfamilyfoundation.org. And I have to say, Jacki, I figured you'd probably appreciate the shout out to American Bank and Trust, our friend Doug Tribble, also a classmate at Leadership South Dakota. American Bank and Trust has been a longtime sponsor of ours. If you want to learn more about their banking services and who they are, you can go to abt.bank. So now that we've kind of gone through a quick breather here, I figured it's a good sort of transition for us. We just talked a little bit about what this means from a technical perspective, what this means for broadband, and sort of the timeline, because I think most folks assume sometimes, things just happen and they don't. So tell me from your perspective, what does this change and sort of this conversation meant to Vantage Point?
Yeah. From Vantage Point's perspective, creating those better lives, that better broadband, better lives, that's what drives us at all times. Now, a lot of times that's coming through in ways like making sure public investment is being used wisely for robust, future-proofed networks so that people can have access to those benefits. With this in particular, I think, again, we sort of mentioned the banality of good, right? This is another memo we're sending. It's another service that we're offering to help our clients out with to make sure that they're meeting both the technical and the educational pieces. I think it gets to be a little bit more meaningful because this is such a direct example of the power of that ability to connect. It's such a meaningful and for some of us a very personal tool that folks are going to be able to use to access those better resources. And so sometimes it can feel a little abstract. If you are the resident overseeing construction to make sure that it's being built exactly like the engineers drew it, it can feel a little abstract that, am I really making people's lives better? By arguing whether it's truly buried to the depth that it's supposed to be. And this is a tool, this is a change where, is this going to save lives? Is this going to impact people? And it's such a resounding and clear connection that, yes, this is work that will directly and immediately, once we get to July 16, 2022, directly impact the quality of life for people because they will have that access to the resource. Now, I work in marketing, I work in communications, and so I understand the phone number is there, the lifeline is there. In South Dakota, we're fortunate to have that 211 where it's already a 3-digit dial. But how people access resources and how they remember information is really important. And by making it easier to remember, that is going to have such a direct impact. And that's something I think about a lot because I think about communication a lot. How do you get people to understand information and really internalize it and remember it and be able to draw upon it when the moment is right?
It's really profound, especially when you think about this from we are, and I think you hit this perfectly. We have such a privilege in so many ways in South Dakota to have access to a 3-digit number. We've been able to benefit from the work of the Helpline Center for years. But thinking of this in a national context and be able to continue to support that is really important culturally. And I'd be curious from the telecoms you work with, you don't just work in South Dakota, I know that. What are the telecoms saying? What are their thoughts on this?
I think there's sort of a mix, right? I think that for some of them, this is another change we need to make and we're going to make it. Some of them won't have as much work to do if they were already 10-digit locations. Others will have more work to do, right? So I think for some folks, it's sort of that checkbox, right? We need to make this change. Check, it's done. We need to educate our end users. Check, that's done. But I think all of us who work in the industry, and it's a very close-knit industry, especially those of us who work with rural connectivity, we already know the impact communication is making. It's why we are here. It is one of the most rewarding areas you can work in, to be building these networks and supporting those connections. And so it's another layer to that where this is personal. Unfortunately, many of us know of families or have families that have been impacted by suicide. And Being able to be part of a solution for that, I think we find very rewarding.
That makes perfect sense, especially I know you and I have discussed this in the past, and just thinking of this from a rural perspective, having that access to mental health resources, especially in places where it may not be as accessible to find a mental health care professional, having at least a line of defense at minimum is really important. And I think it's important not to discount this too. I mean, I'm laughing as I'm thinking of this. You're a human, Jacki. Like, you actually have thoughts on what this looks like. Like, you're, as an employee, as a person who's sort of in the midst of this, what does it mean to you personally?
Yeah. Eric, you just mentioned that rural access. Rural America is very close to my heart. There's no place I'd rather be than the prairie. Not in winter, right? Not when it's 1 degree outside. But
we don't talk about that.
Generally speaking, rural is where I come from. Rural is where I like to be. Cities are nice, and then I get to leave them. But rural comes with trade-offs. And sometimes those trade-offs are that you don't have necessarily some of the amenities that you have other places. I would love to have a Nelson Atkins Museum or a Museum of Modern Art in Mitchell, South Dakota. But that's one of the trade-offs that I make by living in rural, is that some of those institutions aren't there. That also affects healthcare and mental health care, where we don't necessarily have all of those resources. As you've mentioned, many things that we are fortunate for here in South Dakota, 211 is one of those. But this, by making it easier to have this 3-digit dialing, it brings the help closer to where you are. And so if you don't have in-person or sort of more local support opportunities, it's something that brings you closer to it. Instead of remembering a longer phone number, which was better than not having the phone number, by reducing that down to just 3 digits, I think is really impactful. So it means a lot to me personally, because it means a lot to rural America. And if it's important to rural America, it's important to me.
That's a really, yeah. I can hear everything you're saying about rural, and I'm just like, yes, this is exactly what we need to be talking about. But no, it's really, I think it's really important for people to hear sort of what this impact looks like for rural places. And not to say that it's not impactful everywhere, of course, but I don't know that we always think of what mental health care trade-offs we experience in rural places. So I know that's meaningful to you for a lot of reasons, but I figured, if there's any person who would get what this means from this particular lens, like it's definitely Jacki. So I am curious though too, like, so you've had conversations, there's obviously marketing and sort of consulting that goes out into this. Before we take another quick breather, tell me a little bit about sort of what does this look like in practice? So how are you communicating with telecoms and for implementing this? What's being shared, I guess, at this point?
Yeah. So when the order came out, just like we often do, we have engineers and consultants that work very closely on helping our clients sort of digest what the policy is, what the changes are, what needs to happen, and when. And so, again, putting it into the workflow, right? How do we get the word out? Our teams put their heads together and put out a couple different memos last fall. And again, those go out to folks in the industry, to carriers who are impacted, so that they could understand, here's what the order said. Here's what it means for you. This is when you have to do it. Just because it says 2022 doesn't mean you can wait until 2022. There are things that need to happen. And so we put that information together, we digest that, help get that out to the industry. We've also done, like I mentioned, some explainer videos, one of them featuring yourself, Eric, and then Ann Kelly as well, who I know is very important to Lost and Found. And that communication piece was very meaningful to me, because I think it sort of had this conversation in reverse. It took the perspective of you and Anne as people who are working every day with suicide prevention, and said, hey, telecom providers, yes, this is something that you have to do because you have to do it, but it's also very meaningful. And so being able to take that message and send it back to my industry and say, look how important this is. Look at the impact you are having. Was something that was really fun for me. I enjoyed being able to send the communication the other direction. So like I said, we've done some memos. We've done that thank you really to the industry. And then it's a matter of working with the carriers to make sure, are you going to meet your milestones? Where do you need help? What steps need to be done? No two networks are alike. If you have seen one telecom provider, you have seen one telecom provider. And so what they need is different. And then it becomes a really one-on-one conversation between exactly what needs to happen for your company or for your co-op, and how do we need to make that get from point A to point B. And so it starts off as this really broad communication. Here's what happened with the order. Here's what it means for you. Here's what needs to happen generally. Now let's have a conversation about what is your implementation plan? How are you going to accomplish that customer education? How are you going to do those translation updates? How are you going to put together the switch translations and all of these other acronyms that the engineers work on? It becomes more of the one-on-one implementation at that point.
So plenty of technical steps to cover along the way, to say the least.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
we've got the engineers and the consultants, right?
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's why they get paid the big bucks, right? Get to do the technical steps. Mm-hmm. I think it's good to transition a little bit and share too. Like, as we're thinking about this, one of the reasons why these pieces came together is because of not just folks like Jacki, who are on the front lines communicating with telecom providers about the steps and what it means, but also being able to talk to the folks who are obviously making the ultimate decisions about where these things come together. So I really wanted to highlight this comment from Angela, a friend of ours and colleague from American Foundation Suicide Prevention South Dakota. It's really important to continue to stay in touch with state representatives and also your members of Congress, wherever you're located, to really explain the importance and meaning behind these bills, especially when we're talking about the impact it has, not just for our communities, but also, as Jacki's pointing out, you're talking about a change to an entire industry. So really being able to explain what that looks like, especially on the ground, is really important. And thanks, Angela. I know you're tuning in. Appreciate your sharing here. One thing to say too here is, just as a quick note for folks who are watching and thinking about ways to get involved. The whole point of our work here today is really to talk about sort of this need for the day-to-day work that helps make suicide prevention possible. And so if you're interested in getting involved and learning more, Lost&Found's been gathering training opportunities from our partners like the Helpline Center, NAMI South Dakota, Children's Home Society, so many other organizations who are in our state who provide mental health peer support training. So if you'd like to join our newsletter and get that access and information, you can click on the link here or use this link shared. It'll be shared in the chat here momentarily, but that way you can make sure you're getting signed up and taking action to not just advocate for these programs, but also if you want to get into the front lines, so to speak, and really be a support to your friends and family to get involved that way. Mm-hmm. So Jacki, I got to transition a little bit here to some rapid fire questions, and then I'll have one more big one for you. So prepare yourself. So let's start off with some quick ones. So coffee or tea?
Ooh, coffee in the morning, decaf tea at night.
I like your style. Forest or beach?
Okay, first of all, I'm a natural redhead. So if I go out in the sun, if I start thinking about the sun, I will start burning. But I'm also like extremely allergic to bug bites. So the prairie, could I stay on the prairie? Is that an option?
That's a good, I'd like to say it's a non-answer, but we'll take it.
We took our kids to the beach for the very first time, actually right before the pandemic struck. And the joy and the wonder that they experienced was pretty phenomenal. So I'll go with beach. If I have to pick one, Eric.
Okay. I appreciate you doing that. What never fails to lower your stress levels?
Never fails?
Never fails.
Singing out loud. I'm not saying I'm good at it, right? But like I sometimes explain to my kids, sometimes your feelings get too big and they have to come out somewhere. Okay, no, my kids are 5, 6, and 8, so we're talking little here. But singing out loud, sometimes in the car, sometimes in the kitchen, Usually not with an audience, though.
Sometimes you just got to make a joyful noise, hence the words joyful noise. So I can appreciate that. Okay. Any person, live or dead, doesn't matter who are you having dinner with?
You know, we lost my sister 13 years ago this month. And it pretty hands down, I'd like to have dinner with her again sometime.
I love that. What are you reading right now?
I am just finishing up a book called Range by David Epstein, talking about sort of how a diverse set of experiences can prepare you for a diverse set of problem solving. So I'm finishing that up, and actually being delivered today is my next book that I'm really excited about. A college professor of mine actually wrote it. It's called Artificial Life After Frankenstein. She's a political scientist and is a specialist in Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, and has found this really tremendous angle at analyzing, as we're looking at artificial intelligence and as we're looking at the ethics of artificial intelligence, what can we find in previous literature and art and film and television that can be instructive to us. And so it's a college professor of mine. She references Gattaca, which is one of my favorite movies. And it's about this artificial intelligence and ethics. So currently I'm reading Range, but my next book is Artificial Life After Frankenstein.
I'm going to have to pick your brain on that one. That sounds fascinating. And I'm not sure that I would have ever heard of it unless you had shared it.
She was one of my most profound mentors. One of those people that really changes your life. And I can't wait to read what came out of her head.
Well, let us know how it goes. I want to read it myself. Last question I have for you, because I can't leave out a good question about South Dakota. What's your favorite South Dakota destination?
The Dignity Sculpture by Chamberlain. I love her. I absolutely love her. I think she is beautiful. I had the opportunity with you through Leadership South Dakota to meet with Dale Lampier and hear his approach when he went about sort of capturing her. I'm a big fan of art and public art installations, and that Dignity captured my heart the first time I saw her. I love her.
Multiple views captured in that specific location. You really can't, I can't argue with that one. So
yeah, it's beautiful.
Last big question for you, of course. So, when you think about this change coming from your perspective, how do you think this is going to change our communities when you think of 988 and the changes that are coming?
I think it will change our communities quietly. Within the industry, it's something that needs to be done. And so we're going to get to work and we're going to do it because that's what we do. But I think that a lot of the impact is going to come from that education. And for those who have been working in suicide prevention, Eric, like yourself and the Lost&Found team and others, you've already been working to get the word out about 211 and about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That education doesn't stop. 988 is a tremendous resource because it makes that phone number shorter, it makes it easier, it makes it more memorable. But it's only memorable if people remember it, and people will only remember it if we're talking about it and if we're promoting it. And so getting the 3-digit was one thing. Implementing the 3-digit, the industry, we've got it, right? We'll get that work done. Getting people to know it, getting people to access it, getting people to call it when they need to and to know that that's available, that is work that isn't going to stop anytime soon. And so I think that a lot of it, that work is going to be ongoing, and that work is going to be a continuation of so many of the efforts that have already been in place. And I think that it will change our communities quietly. We notice when we lose someone. We don't notice when we save someone. We don't notice when the status quo doesn't change. And so I think that it's something really worth celebrating, because it's not something that we're gaining. It's something that we're not losing. These are people. These are human beings. These are souls. And the world is better because they are here. And so giving them every resource that they have to access when they are having a tough moment, I think that that is really powerful, but it's powerful quietly.
That's a really great way to put it. And I appreciate you sharing sort of this perspective that the implementation will move, things will move forward. But at the end of the day, we're going to see this sort of a nonstop conversation about what it means to actually have sort of conversations about mental health. So I appreciate you putting that in perspective. I have one final question for you before I ask you to add anything else. What's a song that somebody should be listening to right now?
Whoa. Only one?
Just one.
Comeback Kid by Brett Dennen. That's My Dog. The song is also called That's My Dog. Comeback Kid by Brett Dennen. It is one of my absolute favorites, especially to listen to in the morning to start your day off right. They're going to listen to one song. I can't believe you only gave me one. Comeback Kid.
I have to keep things kind of, confined a little bit. We could be on here all day. We're talking music. So.
Yeah. All right. That's what I'll go with.
Okay. We'll add that for folks who are watching. Lost and Found's gathering a list of songs that will be put into a 2021 playlist. Songs to uplift, to grieve to, whatever you need. We're gathering a list of songs from folks who are joining us each week. And I'm excited to get to the final playlist. You'll see in the comments here in the next hour or so, you'll see the song pop up. But figured I'd ask. I just want to say before we drop, what else do you want to say? What else did we miss here?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having me on today for the Voices of Resilience. Thank you for recognizing the industry and that while we are doing our jobs in service of a greater cause, which is getting people connected. And for this change specifically, helping people get connected to the resources that they need. And I would also just say thank you, Eric, and thank you, Lost and Found. Thank you, Heidi and team and Anne, because the work you are doing is of utmost importance. And especially in rural areas, especially with the young people that you focus on, things can feel really big some days and things can feel really hard some days. And just helping people remember that there is resilience to be found within ourselves. There is resilience you can borrow from others and find elsewhere. I think that the work you guys are doing is extraordinary. And I just appreciate the chance to participate.
Thanks, Jacki. It's always great to be able to sit down and chat with you. I feel like, again, I know we're kind of confined to this 45-minute time slot. We can probably keep going, but for all of us, thanks from Lost and Found for joining, and really appreciate your perspective.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Eric.
Thanks, Jacki. So we'll close out today as we typically do, and just really think about sort of some final thoughts. When you think about what this change means to us, it's really a matter of long-term thinking, a matter of, as Jacki put it, thinking about this in a quiet change in the ways in which we continue to approach thinking about suicide risk, thinking about the way that we manage and support each other day to day. And so I really encourage you to think about not just the changes that Jacki was talking about, but also thinking about what this means for us long term. The conversation doesn't end here by any stretch of the imagination. And I encourage you, as you're thinking about some of these changes and some of the things that are coming up, if you want to learn more about the 988 number, simply go to fcc.gov. You'll be able to learn all about sort of the steps that have been taken and why it came into fruition. And if you want to learn more about the work that Jacki does and the company she works for, Vantage Point, you can go to vantagepnt.com. Really great organization based in Mitchell, South Dakota. I think a lot of folks should really know more about it. But really happy today here we can share more about what Vantage Point is and does. When we leave you today, again, I really encourage you to think about the comments that were shared today, whether it's the fact that today in South Dakota, we're very lucky to have a 3-digit crisis line. If you want to be able to access that, you simply call 211. 3 digits are already there. What we talked about today was also a really good opportunity to think about sort of what the stages of organization and support we need in our communities. And that means more conversation. That means more action, more ways in which that we can get involved. And sometimes I think it's difficult for us to understand what it means to get involved in suicide prevention. And today's story from Jacki is a really good example of how an entire industry is taking sort of a common step forward to make a difference in our communities. But for your own, think about the ways you can contact and talk with your community leaders about mental health, and even just learn more about ways you can bring training to your community or find ways to get active. And we've created or curated a list of training, and we'll continue to do so month to month in South Dakota and frankly, wherever you are. And so if you want to get access to information about that training, ways to get active in the suicide prevention space, simply go to bit.ly/getmhtraining. If you want to learn more about Lost and Found and what we do here, simply go to our website, resilienttoday.org. All sorts of resources that we're sharing, and there's more to come as the year goes on. But what I want to leave you with today is when you think about sort of the best news of the week, I really encourage you to think about the ways in which our communities, and especially all levels of government right now, are really beginning to talk more about mental health. And I encourage you, as was directed in the comments here earlier, think about ways you can contact your legislators and talk about mental health, because it is becoming a greater conversation. And at this moment in time when states are convening and governments are convening, it's a really good time and opportunity for us to talk about this and talk about it within our community. So I'll leave you with that for today. And again, I thank you all for tuning in today to this week's edition of Voices of Resilience. Join us next week for guest Wendy Mamer, and we talk about the ways in which a suicide loss survivor, Wendy, is contributing back to her community in really meaningful ways and sharing her own experience to help others find resilience. Thanks for tuning in today, folks, and have a great week. The name Lost and Found is meant to convey the short distance between success and struggle, and the unity that we have as human beings in that struggle that we carry each day, and the opportunities for us to overcome. Lost and Found seeks to end suicide in the United States by connecting young adults with the skills and community for lifelong resilience. We're all in different places in our lives, we're all in different locations, but we're still unified around this common idea. No matter how lost you may feel, no matter what hope you found at this point, we're all unified by this goal of finding mental health and living in a world in which suicide is no longer an issue. Lost and Found was founded by a group of University of South Dakota students with the goal of making a difference in the world of suicide prevention.
It's student-driven, it's led by the students, and it shows the students that they have the power to really cultivate a positive sense of well-being.
That continues to be at the core of Lost and Found's work today. Lost and Found programs focus on creating resilience for self, others, and community.
We want them to be able to walk away with tangible skills. So our chapter is really focusing on that. And then within that realm, we're focused on creating a community on campuses that is all-encompassing of the mental health needs of students.
We've also introduced the research piece that allows us to get a better understanding of practices on campuses and of students and how students are doing on campuses.
And where are those points kind of within the cycle of student services where we can make a difference and we can help.
And by having that understanding, we can better respond with programs, advocacy, and outreach that best meets the needs of our community.
This is one of the most open-minded and welcoming organizations, especially for those who struggle with mental health issues.
We could be a part of creating a solution, giving them skills so they could deal with their mental health struggles in a more productive, better way, but also just to have a language to talk about it and a community of support.
This is a great organization to get you talking about mental health and advocate for it and understand the importance that it will have.
There's so much that we can do, and I see the potential in that, in getting all of these people to come together. That will always excite me.
It's the best way to feel at home and help others who are in similar struggles. If you're not struggling with mental health issues, this is one of the easiest ways to get involved and help understand those who are.
The reason that we focus on resilience as an organization is to unite people
around the idea that we all struggle, we all face challenges, we all navigate difficulties, but the kicker is we can all learn how to navigate. We are compassionate.
We are inclusive.
We are responsive.
And we are here.